lovely people whose son sadly died. He committed suicide after he became involved in gambling and became an addict and was unable to escape. He started gambling when he was 17 whilst he was still at school. On the first weekend of the Premier League, there was 29,000 gambling adverts. It's a 160% increase on the year before. Children are able to gamble sooner and sooner, and they're developing really quite dangerous habits. What is the harm of young men dropping out of the workforce, getting depressed, committing suicide? What is the economic harm of the damages to relationships? There's a huge amount of crime that people get involved to if they build up gambling debts.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Leading Communities podcast. Today we are out on the Halesowen High Street. We are being joined by the MP for Halesowen, Alex Ballinger. He's just around 8 to 9 months into his position, and we are going to be learning a little bit about the journey so far and also some very important topics that he's campaigning for. And if you are a social enterprise, social entrepreneur, maybe you're in policy, this is that type of podcast to really listen about that early journey and where we can go when we want to support people like your MPs, but also what we can do to learn how to make sure that we are useful in certain types of campaigns, especially those that affect communities, high streets, and also families. Okay, so Alex, thank you and welcome to the Leading Communities podcast.
Thank you, Kit.
I'd be interested in some of that journey so far.
Sure.
So understanding that, yes, you're 9 months in, or 8 to 9 months in, but how did we get here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation, Kit. I'm delighted to be on the podcast. So I didn't really come from a political background. My career has been public service for most of my life. I followed my dad into the military when I was a young man and ended up in the Royal Marines. I spent about 8 years serving, including overseas a couple of times.
What year to what year?
So I joined in 2005, and I left in 2013. The Royal Marines, they're like amphibious infantry. Yeah. So we go and do lots of stuff at sea, but we also do a lot of service that's similar to the army. Mm-hmm. So the active service that I saw was 2 tours of Afghanistan in 2006 and 2009.
And did you go through the university route first? And did you go through sort of the army training cadets, or was this straight out of university you just went straight?
So I did both. So I initially joined the Royal Marines Reserve, which is the enlisted ranks, people that don't really need lots of qualifications to join. It's more about your determination and your physical strength. I did that for about a year, and then I commissioned as an officer. And most officers need a degree. So I did my degree in Manchester. I have an engineering degree. I initially wanted to join the Air Force, Kit, but I wasn't quite good enough to pass the pilot tests. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I did 8 years in the Royal Marines, a couple of tours of Afghanistan. But whilst I was working overseas, I saw some of the other sides of the government's work, some of the other sides of the aid work that was happening, and I felt actually, whilst I really enjoyed working in a team, serving my country, fighting for the values that the UK stands up for, I also saw the excellent work that was being done by aid workers, engineers, doctors, humanitarian workers, and I thought, actually, this is something that I'd really like to get involved in. So I left, as I say, in 2013. I retrained, and then I became a humanitarian worker.
What did you retrain in?
So I did a master's degree in conflict studies.
Okay.
And I then ended up working around Syria. So helping refugees that were fleeing the war in Syria in different countries in the Middle East. So
this is the Arab uprising era?
Yeah, so that would have been from 2015, 2016. So the Arab Spring in 2011. After the Arab Spring, there was a huge civil war in Syria. And it had the largest migration crisis in the world at that point. In Turkey, there were over 3 million Syrians who
Kurdish people were affected already from Iraq as well.
There are many Kurds in the north of Syria and Iraq who were affected by the fighting. Turkey got involved in the war. Over 1 million refugees fled to Syria, similar numbers in Lebanon, and of course we've heard the numbers of people that came to Europe. So my job at that time was to work to help refugees in countries nearby to Syria, so they could get jobs, they could fit into the education system, We had a series of health centres. Obviously, if your first language is Arabic, if you're in Turkey, the language is Turkish, you need all sorts of adjustments. You need a medical staff that can understand and communicate. So we did a lot of work with many different countries, like an international coalition, to try and provide those services and help people as close to Syria as possible, so that when the war ended, and it appears to have started to end in the last year or so, it would be easier for people to come home. I did that for about 4 years. Then I moved to Pakistan. I joined the Foreign Office. I did some work in the tribal districts of Pakistan, improving the governance there, working with the civil service.
Which areas?
So in the northwest of Pakistan, there's a province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And part of that is what used to be called the federally administered tribal areas.
Okay.
So these are areas, since the British Raj, basically, that were left to their own devices, led by tribal leaders, different laws, different rules, and it doesn't really have the reach of the state into that part of the country. And that means that they can be quite brutal.
Is it more like the Sharia law end of things?
It's tribal law as well as Sharia law. Health services are very poor. Education is not very accessible. Justice system is very tribally focused and can be very unfair if you're not within that system. And it becomes, as you can imagine, a place where young men, young people, they don't have many opportunities, and they can often turn to extremism and other dangerous paths. So my work at that time was to help the Pakistan government bring in the state. So bring in the police stations, the courts, the schools, the health services, and teach them, work alongside the government on good ways to implement projects that could do that, to try and bring basically what people would expect in a normal life into that part of the country.
And can I bring a thought note in there? Because I think there's a little bit of learning in here for a couple of types of industry. So I think sometimes it's not always spoken about. The aspects of how the UK or Britain does things is not always what you see.
Yeah.
There's whether we call it soft power or just, I don't know what, consultancy or whatever, but it's really interesting that what you're really saying is that, in the 2010s / maybe 2020s, there are still parts of the world where the state and the people have almost very opposing approaches, and these countries will reach out to other countries, including the UK, to say, show us how to integrate this. And I think sometimes we don't see that industry, especially when we talk about international trade and such. Just the knowledge exchange that I think you've just articulated is very, very interesting, that there are ways where we are offering good practice, you might argue. So I just think it's worth noting, because I think sometimes when people are maybe starting a new business idea, or they always think, what does government do? And, who are these? There are tons of relationships being built that we don't see. And sometimes when it's in the news is when it's too late. You know what I mean? Like, there are things that we need to influence beforehand. There are things there's knowledge exchange that's happening at quite interesting levels. And I just think it's important for learning, because there's a lot in what you said, and I think some people might gloss over it, but I just wanted to say that that's a really interesting industry, and there's a lot of people that do this for 30, 40 years, and they go around different parts of the world.
It's really important that we offer these partnerships with developing countries around the world. Not only does it benefit people that are in very deprived situations, as you say, it's a massive soft power tool for the United Kingdom. So the fact that we are able to offer experts that can work in places like Pakistan, that can provide advice, that can work alongside the government to reform, improve, and change the perception of people on the ground of what they're getting from the country is really valued by governments. And that then affects our relationships with those countries. So if we, for example, want to have improved trading relationships with a country like Pakistan, the work that we're doing in the background is extremely beneficial. If, again, for example, we have foreign criminals in the country and we need to deport them, we need to have an agreement with that sort of country. And if we're doing that work in the background, if we already have a good relationship with that soft power, that can make those conversations much easier than otherwise. So there are all sorts of benefits.
At the back of my head, I've got the words "give before you take." So just for my clarity, to what extent do these countries pay for you to be there, or is it Britain offering it first?
So, I mean, there's all sorts of different models.
There's different arrangements, okay.
Yeah, so some of it may be countries commissioning, buying that sort of expertise to come in on a competition basis. Some of it might be a grant from the United Kingdom government. I think the amount of that is going to be granted, you may have seen in the news a couple of weeks ago, is reducing because we're increasing our spending on defence in response to the terrible war that's going on in Ukraine. I mean, I think personally that investment in international development, that investment in soft power has massive implications for our prosperity, our security, for tackling extremism and for those partnerships. And it's really important that we maintain that.
And that's why I wanted to highlight it, because if it's a case of obviously they're paying for you to be there and there are models like that. But I think what you've also highlighted that is that what I would argue is the give before you take. Build the relationships before the point of need. And I think, again, sometimes maybe we're tricked, or there's a better word for it, but people don't understand the work that you have to do behind the scenes before you make some very difficult relationship decisions. And all of this work, consultancy, relationship building, it allows then when you do want to penetrate said entity, they at least say, well, you know what, this is what they've done for us. This is where they made that difference. This is where we got this realization. And did you know what I mean? And that then ideally is almost like a social lubricant or decision-making lubricant, because there's always somebody that's going to oppose something.
I mean, absolutely. And I'll just add one more thing. I mean, one element of soft power that we just talked about is international aid, but there are lots of other elements. So the BBC World Service is another excellent one. So if people are seeing the BBC, people are hearing what the United Kingdom is doing around the world, they're hearing our view on things, that can really improve our relationships. The British Council, it does a lot of English language training. It does a lot of university connections. If we're getting the leaders of the future, if we're getting people that might be ministers in the future government of any country around the world coming to the UK to go to university here, they're going to build relationships here, they're going to build a positive picture of the UK, and when they go back and get into those leadership positions, that's going to really help our trade, economy, and negotiations.
So Brand Britain is working on several levels.
Of course.
You may not have to answer this, but this is just now me as a thinking civilian. So I do also wonder that, do we factor that in when we see the issues with immigration and the boats? Do we factor in that we kind of made Brand Britain so appealing, you know what I mean? Is that the side effect of Brand Britain working?
I mean, you ask why people would make these dangerous trips to the UK, Kit, and often people are fleeing war zones, they're fleeing real hardship and difficulty. But the reason they're choosing to come to the UK rather than going to other countries is because of the English language, because of our reputation as a fair country. And
all those colonial relationships.
Because of our long history in those areas. And that is something that has that implication as well.
I just always think that that's never told. That, you know, Brand Britain is strong. It's very strong. It's very appealing. Okay, so that journey, as you've now said, I'm hearing that the skill of diplomacy clearly is being learnt. I was very curious about when you're working in a military role and you're working alongside aid workers, how does that work? Like, are they teaching you more about that kind of soft power negotiation, or are you teaching them more? Because on paper, they look like two separate worlds.
I mean, I would say it's not one side teaching another, it's a partnership. So if you're, and I'll use Afghanistan as an example again, if you're working hand in hand with the military and development actors, it would be the security in a place that is quite dangerous would be provided.
So you bring the security?
The military, the Royal Marines in the example I give, would be working with the Afghan police and the Afghan army to sort of provide security to an area. And then it would be development workers alongside many local contractors that would come in and they rebuilding the buildings that have been damaged in the fighting, helping with agriculture.
Healthcare.
Healthcare, supporting economic growth in an area, giving a reason for people to come back and work alongside the government and rebuilding trust in the state that is there as well. Because if you don't have that, if it's just a security response, you're just going to breed kind of resentment. You're going to breed hatred, paranoia. If people don't have opportunities, they're going to look and see, well, what's changed in my life? The thing that's changed is we've got these foreigners that are over here, and you're just putting a target on your back. Some of that happens anyway, but you can mitigate a lot of that by really investing in the areas that you're working in.
Again, give before you take, perhaps. That kind of like mindset.
Yeah.
So what then do you now transfer into your job role now? You're 8 months into working into Parliament.
Sure.
First of all, actually, how do you decide, or how was it decided for you to look after an area, and then where does all that backstory influence what you're doing here?
So I left the Foreign Office about 3 years ago. I wasn't happy with the direction of the country. I saw the government was making some decisions I really disagreed with on the National Health Service, around Brexit. And I thought their treatment of our allies in Afghanistan when we withdrew in 2021 was a national scandal. So I thought that actually I should try and do something about that. I could sit on the sidelines and complain, or I could get involved and try and change the system. So I got a job in Birmingham. I ran a mental health charity for over a year. And I was doing a lot of work in Halesowen, working with the Labour Party here. We had lots of clients that were coming from the area. My family's from the West Midlands anyway. So I thought it was a good opportunity to put myself forward to really offer some change to the town.
And how did you the charity, are you allowed to name?
Yeah. So it's St Germain's in Edgbaston. It's called St Germain's Wellbeing. We're connected to the Anglican Church there. We help people with depression and anxiety. Really small grassroots charity, kind of fills the gap where the NHS isn't able to support those people that aren't quite up for that clinical type of care.
So how does that look in terms of that delivery? So, because it's good that you said that you're helping with mental health, but now I'm hearing there's actually some clinical aspects. So was it at the psychotherapist level, clinical psychologist? Do you remember how they were doing it?
Yeah. So we had a number of CBT practitioners, and I think they combined that with people-centered counselling. So it was a slightly different model than you might get in the National Health Service. And we would try and tailor it to the individual. Very comfortable setting, inside a church hall. People wouldn't feel any sort of pressure in the way that you might do to turn up for your NHS CBT meetings. And I think that helped us particularly with people that were struggling with alcohol abuse, people that had real serious anxiety and were unable to engage with those more state-based systems. It was an excellent small charity that kind of filled that gap where people weren't quite able to get help they needed through the NHS.
And being CEO, I'm going to assume you're not necessarily at the clinical end. So
That's
how
right,
were you, for those people that are looking to develop mental health provisions, maybe there's a couple of psychologists that want to do more in the community. How were you spending your time to keep resources going, keep standards going?
Yeah. So my as with many CEOs of charities, my main focus was fundraising. So in order to keep the charity going, to pay my team, to enable as many people to access it as possible, I needed to be out and about, speaking to as many different providers, getting in front of the NHS, talking to trusts, and trying to raise the money to run that service.
How did you manage your time? Like, was there a ratio? Is there any kind of framework that you use?
I mean, I wouldn't pretend to be as organised as that. I tended to prioritise anything to do with fundraising because that was so essential for the running of the business. So I would look for opportunities to work alongside the core funders. So the NHS, the Birmingham and Solihull Trust. We were lucky enough to get a spot on the voluntary sector panel that was providing advice on working between the voluntary sector and the NHS. You're able to establish a good reputation for your charity in that area, build those relationships with the key stakeholders that you might need to ask for money further down the line, and then really talk about how to improve the system so the voluntary sector in general can get the best relationship with the NHS to make sure we're really delivering for patients.
So again, a tiny bit of give before you take. If you can be on an advisory panel, a space of influence, that helps.
I mean, that really helps. I would say get to know the key funders and what they care about, what they want from you, and be able to talk the same language that they're talking. So I mean, having worked in development, sometimes I'd be writing to, let's say, Save the Children, asking them to deliver a project. And as long as they were speaking the same language as me, we could commission them to go and deliver that project. It's exactly the same working with the NHS. You need to be able to describe what you're doing and how what you're doing is going to hit the goals that they want to achieve.
You've got to align with their strategic objectives.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Do you get the same, again, you may not know this answer, but do you think you'd get the same results if your email was a hotmail.co.uk, gmail.com versus a very established, X, Y, and Z.org?
Really good question, Kit. So the more sort of brand identity you can have, the more professional identity you can have with your email, with a website, Facebook page, demonstrating the history of work that you've done, pictures, smiling beneficiaries, these sorts of things. They help build a picture of the good work a charity is doing. And they help convince funders that you're going to do some good with their money. You're not just going to walk off and not achieve your goals.
Yeah, and that's important, isn't it? It's confidence. I always say everyone's trying to solve a problem, even though, what's the word? I wouldn't even call it the zeitgeist, but the parlance in third sector is very, just give us the money. But people forget that there is really a value exchange. And then because there's so much competition, the brand matters. So arguably, I know you didn't learn it from Brand Britain, but what Brand Britain is doing, we should all learn from. What are all the ways that you can build influence, build trust, give before you take, and then hopefully at that point of need, there's less friction in order to get that. And I think it's underestimated because everybody wants to start in January and they want to be changing the world by June, but actually you need to start in January and then maybe you have to wait 5 years before somebody recognizes, which is an uncomfortable.
I wouldn't say 5 years, but and that there is funding available to those smaller startup charities. The National Lottery is a great one for that if you just want to have a few £1,000s to get you off the ground. But if you want to really transform into a larger functioning organisation, that can take a few years.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so kind of bringing that back now to Halesowen, you're noticing, you're not happy with the world again, which I do think a lot of people want to learn. I think there are people that worked in civil service that, there's something about the world I see I'm not happy about. I'm going to try and do something about it. You've then gone and built some of that experience, and then how did that shift into joining a political party? How did you choose one?
I mean, good questions. So I joined the Labour Party when I left the Royal Marines in 2013. I felt they aligned with my values. I wanted to see more social justice. I wanted the state to really work for everybody in the country. I wanted a strong national health service. And I thought the Labour Party stood for all of the values that I held. So I was quite comfortable joining it back then. But because of my job, I was overseas so much, I wasn't really able to get involved in politics too much. So it was only when I came back to the UK in 2022 that I really started campaigning with the party, building those relationships in the area and understanding actually how much of a difference you can make through politics at the local level.
Okay. So Halesowen, chosen with you? You chose it?
Yeah, so I was living in Birmingham, working in Halesowen. I had a great relationship with the councillors. I was talking to people on the street, seeing the problems that they were facing, problems with the National Health Service, problems with not seeing police anymore, rising crime, struggling businesses, and people, they seemed like they really wanted a change. And working with the local party here, they thought I would be a good candidate. I went through all the normal selection processes, did a hustings and the like, and ended up being the person the Labour Party put on the ballot.
Okay, and what was that battle like, say, psychologically? You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to assume other people wanted it. And I say that because, again, there are people that are going to be facing competition for things that make a difference. So how do you navigate?
I mean,
what's it like behind the scenes?
So that selection process, I mean, it's not always the same in every seat, but what we did in Halesowen is pretty standard. So the people apply in writing to the party, and the party sort of shortlists a number of candidates that they think are suitable, who they do due diligence checks on you all to make sure no one has done anything illegal, or they have an impeccable sort of backstory. They check your local connections. And then you have to spend about 2 weeks talking to the local party members in Halesowen. And there is what's called a hustings. So all of the candidates, and there were 3 candidates in my case, gave a speech, did some questions and answers with the local party members, and then they get to vote on who they wanted to come forward as their candidate. And I was obviously honoured to have been selected by the local members after that vote.
Brilliant. So what do you then bring in, say, from that mental health experience now into the role? How you navigate it, like, you know, even with Parliament?
Yeah.
How does it work? And then how does the average, do you and the average person kind of make things move?
Oh, of course. So I've tried to be as accessible, open and as available as possible to everyone across Halesowen. We're in my office right now. It's a new office. We're on the High Street, 14 Peckham Street, in the middle of the town centre. Anyone can walk past, pop in and speak to my team and set up a meeting. We do regular surgeries all around the constituency. We did one at Carter's Lane Baptist Church a couple of weeks ago, the Yemeni Community Centre the week before that. We're in Quarry Bank, we're in Williscote, we're in all different parts of the constituency, making ourselves available and visible so people can come in and speak to me about whatever their problems are. And if there's a particular issue that I think people would be interested in talking to me in larger numbers, so the assisted dying debate is one example, NHS reform that's happening. I try and hold a big community meeting. So 30, 50 people are able to come together to share views. We can discuss what the community wants to get out of it. I can talk through my position. And I think my job is, as a representative, to understand what the community wants, to understand what I think would work best for the people of Halesowen, and then to try and bring those together and work out how I should be acting in Parliament to really represent them properly.
How do you fix that then, in the sense that, so you got, say, 30 people. Do you want to say 2 or 3 things that you do to help get the right type of 30 people? And then once you've learnt that, what do you have to face in Parliament to get things through? Yeah,
so I don't sift anyone that...
it's not like question time.
There's no sifting.
There's a bit of that.
There's no sifting of people that want to meet me and want to share their views. So it's open invitation. If we get more people than we're expecting, we get a bigger hall. Okay. So that's that sort of process.
Do you go through Twitter or Eventbrite? How does that even, just the booking system?
Yeah. So we traditionally advertise on our social media channels. So we use Facebook, Instagram, X. We've just started a TikTok channel. Nice. Which I'm learning how to use.
Nice.
So we advertise on all those. We also have people who email us. So if people have emailed us about a particular issue, we'll email them back, invite them to a meeting on that issue. And we try and engage with as many people as possible. And then in those meetings, I will probably talk for 5 or 10 minutes about the background to the problem, and then I'm really here to listen. So listen to what people care about, what they want me to do, and that allows me to better understand how I can work in Parliament to represent them properly.
And that part of representing them, is it easy? Is it smooth? Is it, they told me, so I'm telling you, so go do it? Or is there a little bit
really
more
complicated. And as someone who hasn't worked in politics before I was elected, navigating my way around the quite complicated parliamentary procedures is a learning experience. There are many different avenues, from emailing or speaking to the minister responsible about a particular issue, which I can do on the NHS, for example. West Streeting holds regular meetings with members of Parliament to discuss the reforms, the things that are happening at the moment, the changes to NHS England, as we saw this week. So I'd be able to speak to him directly, tell him what my constituents were thinking about. If there was a specific issue, I could write to him, outlining the case, and that would go to his team, and they would take that into their thinking. Or if I felt there was something more controversial, we need to have more MPs involved, I could call for a debate. Oh. And then one of the things I called for a debate on was gambling harm, which I think we might talk about later on.
Yeah. I mean, we can go into it straight off.
So that is a good opportunity to really bring issues that you care about to the attention of other parliamentarians. So you're not just lobbying on one issue, you're calling for a debate across people across the UK to see whether we've taken the right approach to a particular issue. So gambling, which I mentioned, last year I met Liz and Charles two lovely people whose son sadly died. He committed suicide after he became involved in gambling and became an addict and was unable to escape it.
How old?
So he was in his early 20s,
Wow.
but he started gambling when he was 17, whilst he was still at school. He used to sneak off in his lunch hour to go to the bookies to gamble on the fixed odds betting terminals. It got to a point actually where he realised he had a problem, so he got his parents to ban him from the local bookmakers. But then gambling advertising was so intense that he got sucked back into gambling online. Lost a lot of money.
Where was he getting the money from?
Well, he was working. I understand. But even after installing blocking software on his phone, the adverts kept coming. The constant bombardment. I mean, you watch a Premier League game, advertising is constant. If you have an addiction, you can't escape it. And as a young person, your mind is really more vulnerable to 100%. that type of advertising. So hearing about Jack was his name, the young man, Charles and Liz's son. After hearing about Jack and hearing about many other young men, and it's mostly young men, unfortunately, who were committing suicide after becoming in this horrible spiral and feeling unable to escape gambling, I thought, we should have a debate on this in Parliament. We should be raising the fact that there are, 400 people a year that are killing themselves because of gambling-related suicides.
You may not know this, but is there a gender split in there?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact specifics, but it's way skewed towards
male.
Men. Yeah, way more men. Women are becoming more involved recently.
Because the bingo kind of apps are under the radar, but they're just as addictive, aren't they?
Yeah. So there's many different types of gambling.
Yeah.
So you have horse racing, dog racing, betting on the football.
Sports.
What we would call traditional gambling that people in the UK have been doing for a long time. That can be harmful, but for many people they enjoy it. It's a bit of a flutter here and there. It's probably not the most serious form of gambling. But you have
casinos,
fixed odd betting terminals, which I mentioned, and then online versions of those. These are very fast. You can win quickly and lose quickly. You get that endorphin rush. And if you have a big win, you get very excited and you want to keep playing.
And people don't know that you're also in autopilot.
Yeah.
These things happen and they're so colorful that it's like you could probably be doing 3 things in 10 seconds. And I think people don't always understand that it's so gamified that you're just clicking.
Yeah. And it's really addictive, and you can rack up huge debts in a very short amount of time without realizing it. And the gambling companies are supposed to have affordability checks, but they're really easy to get past. They're not done properly. There's loads of examples of the Gambling Commission calling them out for failing. And many people slip through the gaps. And it's those more addictive types of gambling, that particularly the online casinos, that are the most profitable for gambling companies. And lots of the marketing, lots of the advertising is targeted towards bringing people into the most profitable. And surprise, that the types of gambling that's the most profitable targets the people who are most vulnerable, people that are from deprived communities, people who probably have the most to lose from gambling the little bit of money that they have left.
Yes.
And it has a massive impact across society, including those suicides that I was already talking about. So we held a debate, I think it was early last month, in Westminster Hall, which is the second parliamentary hall we have in the Houses of Parliament, to discuss the issue, to talk about the harms I just talked about, to talk about the massive amount of advertising that gambling companies are putting in. They're spending £1.5 billion a year on advertising this stuff.
UK only or Europe?
In the UK,
wow.
£1.5 billion. On the first weekend of the Premier League, there was 29,000 gambling adverts. 29,000 adverts across the piece.
One weekend.
In the first opening weekend, and that's 160% increase on the year before. So they're throwing everything at it. And this not only is really struggling, really challenging for people that have a gambling addiction or problem gamblers, it's also targeting children. So how many families go to a football game? How many?
And they see these brands from an early young age.
Constant young people's minds. They're being primed to gamble as soon as they're able to. You had the example of Jack, who was 17, he was going down betting on fixed odds betting terminals. Children are able to gamble sooner and sooner, and they're developing really quite dangerous habits. I heard an example from the newspaper a couple of months ago. Some of the free apps through mobile games that are advertised to children, these have gambling habits on them. So young kids are playing games and they're getting advertised about gambling. Twitter had 1 million gambling adverts on it last year. It's everywhere.
Twitter feels a bit wild. Twitter or X, yeah.
I mean, X, Twitter, whatever it's called now, it has become more worse, for sure. But the proliferation of these adverts is everywhere. And then you speak to people that work in gambling reduction, dealing with people with addiction, they tell you that people that are trying to get out of the gambling addiction, every time they see an advert, they get pulled back in. 87% of them that had seen a gambling advert felt encouraged to gamble again, even if they didn't want to, even if they were going through a treatment program to try and take them away from gambling. And this is something that should be addressed.
So what you've done is you set a really big picture, which is very similar to, say, the food addiction. You can't avoid food.
Yeah.
And with sports or gambling addiction, there's one aspect which is, well, because it's linked to a pastime or a hobby, it's hard. But then number two, the marketing strategies are so omnipresent that you couldn't also even say to someone, but can't you just stay away from, it's as good as saying, don't eat. Because you can't not go on a bus. You can't not watch the news. You can't not, especially if it's a commercial TV, you can't not be on a YouTube. You know what I mean? You literally almost have to live a monk lifestyle if you're not. So how do you articulate that then to people in Parliament? And I'm going to assume there'll be some people that don't get it. So what's that journey of helping people that don't get it, even if they are MPs, to understand what you now see?
So it's really important that we hold these debates and we pass the messages, we share the examples where people have been really hurt, and particularly these young men that have committed suicide, with the ministers who are responsible. And there were many stories from across the country. I think there must have been 20 MPs that spoke in that debate, each one with a harrowing story of somebody that had been in their constituency that had suffered really quite badly. Now, the good news is the government has responded. In the last 2 months, there's been some changes around the gambling white paper. There's been a statutory levy put on gambling operators. Previously, gambling companies used to voluntarily pay towards Gamble Aware. Okay,
so this is quite important, because what you're about to do is draw a really strong picture about the you said and here's what we did. So I just don't want you to, because I think people will miss that. What you've now shown is that in a short space of time, something's changed. So just help us through what's the levy, what does that mean?
So I am absolutely not taking credit for this. A lot of this work started a year or so ago, before under the last government, but it wasn't taken forward. So what this government has done is built upon the proposals that were made, I think it was 2023, in the last gambling white paper. And they have introduced this statutory levy, which is £100 million raised from gambling operators, and that is going to go towards the treatment, prevention and research into gambling harms. One of the things I was calling for and other people were calling for in that debate was as much of that work as possible to be done for the Department of Health Department of Health and Social Care, because a lot of that work previously, the responsibility was held by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. So people need to reframe the way they think about gambling. If you think about gambling as an activity that is all about raising money for the government, and it's part of sport and fun.
It's a revenue activity.
Exactly. You come at it from a different angle. If you think a bit of all the harm that's done, the young men that are committing suicide, the money that's taken out of deprived communities, the relationships that are damaged, all of the harms that you might associate with the two. So I think it's a really positive step that not only do we have this statutory levy, but that is going to be administered by the Department for Health, and they can bring their expertise about dealing with gambling addiction, which they've built up particularly in recent years as this has increased, to take steps around prevention of the most harmful forms of gambling, as well as the treatment and research around it. There was one other thing that was changed. I said probably the most harmful and addictive forms of gambling are these fixed odds betting terminals, and you can do the same thing. Online slots is the online equivalent. They reduced stakes. They introduced stake limits for these. So you used to have unlimited stakes when you were gambling, so you could gamble 10, 50, £100 a time on very quick turnarounds and lose money in a very fast amount of time. They have introduced £2 limits for younger people and £5 limits for.
So you can't gamble more than £5 on one activity.
I mean, people, I would agree, would still argue that that's too much, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And the final thing that's kind of happened between the government and the Premier League is they've banned advertising on shirts, I think, starting from 2026. Again, a step in the right direction, but if you look at the amount of adverts, all of the celebrities, the sportsmen that are on TV,
it doesn't make a difference.
It
doesn't make as much of a difference as you might want.
It's a very small step.
So very important. I think, like I say, you've raised a couple of things. One really important thing I do want to come back to is reframing, because I think in that reframing conversation, there's a huge lesson there. Like, I would say that if there's nothing else that anyone takes from this, the art of reframing is very interesting because it's underrated. But very quickly, just because I think there's an obvious question in the room, it sounds like there must have been people that disagree with you. Otherwise, this problem would have been fixed a long time ago.
Yeah.
So what's that journey like of the people that don't agree? Or what were the counter arguments, I think is a better point.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question, Kit. So there were people in the same debate who represented horse racing tracks, bookmaking headquarters, and they would talk about the economic benefits,
on the economy level,
the revenue that came into the exchequer on the basis of gambling, and people having a fun time going to the horse racing, for example. And I think all of that is completely justified, but you have to, as you say, reframe the argument and think, right, yes, okay, if we're talking about economics, what is the economic harm of gambling? What is the harm of young men dropping out of the workforce, getting depressed, committing suicide? What is the economic harm of the damages to relationships? The crime, there's a huge amount of crime that people get involved to if they build up gambling debts.
Can you tell us more?
Yeah. So we had a meeting in Parliament a couple of weeks ago, hearing from a number of women whose husbands had become involved in gambling and been arrested and sent to prison. They'd lost a lot of money and then they'd stolen it, often from the business that they were running or the charity that they were running, and ended up in prison. Of course, completely illegal, but they wouldn't have been in that situation unless they were gambling in the first place. And then there's a huge knock-on effect onto the families of those people, because the wives, the children, the partners, these people are not involved, but then they suddenly are liable for the debts of their partner that has been sent to prison, that has been involved in the white collar crime. Many other people who become addicted to gambling, they turn to low level crime and burglary. It's a very similar story to drug dealing.
I was just about to say, because so like I say, I think it's very clear that reframing is used on both sides.
Yeah.
And if we reframe in a way, I think one thing about maybe the UK and the West is that we put such an amazing onus on, you're an adult, therefore you can make decisions. However, as you've now recognized, and I say all the time, the average brain doesn't mature till 27.
Yeah.
So the notion of saying, okay, they're 18, so therefore, you know, they can gamble, etc. It feels a little bit like, well, people are picking and choosing an argument. And then as you're then highlighting that actually, when we look at the root cause of certain behaviors, from suicide to crime to maybe like self-harming, people dropping out of the workforce, this activity is very, it penetrates. It penetrates all sorts of lifestyles, all sorts of lives. And it feels a bit like, well, actually, do we need to be reframing so many more things in our communities? Because when you relate that to crime, that's now that's a public health issue. You know what I mean? When you relate that to suicide, it's a public health issue. So where then do you foresee this going? Because it doesn't sound like there's appetite to ban it, because sadly, well, rightly or wrongly.
I'm not calling for gambling to be banned, of course not. and certainly we're not moving in that direction. I think the government needs to look again at gambling regulations as it pertains to advertising and as it pertains to the most harmful forms of online gambling. So those online slots we were talking about, the ones that are really profitable, the ones that target the most vulnerable communities, the ones that take money out of local communities and send it back to companies that operate in tax havens. We should be looking again at how they operate. We should be considering whether they're good for our society. And we should be looking at the way that they are advertised and putting much stricter regulations. I mean, I personally would call for watershed advertising. So you should not be allowed to advertise gambling in an area where children may be able to see those adverts. So football matches, of course, should be banned. You might remember, you're about my age, I think, Kit, Formula One.
Yeah.
So
Tobacco,
it used to be
yes.
covered in tobacco advertising.
Yes.
Every car would have Rothmans, Marlboro on the back. When it became clear, and this was under the last Labour government, that tobacco advertising was linked to people smoking more, and smoking was incredibly bad for your health, it was banned. And Formula One, since then, has found new sponsors and has come on and on and on, and basically is stronger now than it was even before. So we don't even really have an argument that it could be damaging to the sports industry. It's just something that we need to do to protect our young people.
The money aspect keeps spinning in my head because it sounds like everything you're saying is logical. Everything you say is very, very sensible. But so when you know, there's a phrase that we use in our organization, which is, why do we have to fight for common sense, right?
Yeah.
So there feels like the money must be too huge for this common sense to permeate or penetrate. But I also wonder, is there an element of mind management here? Like, what can we do to build more resilient mind in our individuals, in our young people, in our adults?
Yeah.
To what extent would some of that 100 million being set aside kind of work on that, like psychological resilience, emotional resilience? Also, like, because I do believe, this is me speaking now as a former qualified teacher, and I've done work in like security, working on doors, and I see what happens at the end of I've just won at the entry and all of that. So I've seen all of that. I just wonder, to what extent is anybody interested or talking about that, like fortifying the human mind more rather than us only focused on the aesthetics or recovery? Yeah.
I mean, really, really good questions, Kit. So I think that's what that £100 million is earmarked to do. About half of it is going to go directly to the NHS to work on treatment. So people that have gambling addictions, have problems with gambling, to get the mental health support they need through psychotherapists, through CBT, through addiction management schemes. And a lot of that, I hope, is going to be delivered by the voluntary sector. Because as we spoke about at the start, there is absolutely a space for the NHS, but the voluntary sector does have different ways of
advantages.
Advantages. It can be cheaper for one, and the one size fits all approach doesn't always work for everyone. Some of that money is going to go into research, so research on new ways to prevent the most harmful forms of gambling and to treat people that have gambling addictions. And some of it is going to go into that prevention piece, which I think it must involve education at schools. It must involve education amongst groups that might be more susceptible for gambling. So in the West Midlands, for example, there are more problem gamblers per head of population there are in the UK as a whole.
So this is not even a north-south divide, like in the West Midlands?
So it's often a bigger problem in deprived communities. Across the country, 2.5% of people are deemed to be problem gamblers. That is, the gambling is harming their relationships and causing debt, and in the most extreme forms, leading to the things we talked about. So 2.5% of the entire adult population, over 1 million people, are deemed to be problem gamblers. In the West Midlands, it's 4%.
Whoa.
And I think in the worst case, in Coventry, it's 5%. So there is an increase as you go towards more deprived areas, and places like Sandwell in my constituency also suffer more because of it. So I think it's important that we target as much of that support into those areas that are more likely to have problems.
With that point that you've now made, now we've got to think about, as you've now said, you've got Sandwell on one side, Dudley on the other side of your constituency. These are areas where, on paper, obviously still the Black Country, but there are slightly changing dynamics going on.
Yeah.
We've spoken about how gambling can lead to crime, violence, maybe gangs. What would you kind of deem is the other challenges with violence? Is it youth violence more or general violence more? Or?
Yeah. No, thanks for raising that, Kit. Another area that I've been campaigning on that has come up in Parliament is knife crime. And sadly, as with problem gambling, the West Midlands has got a real problem with knife crime. In fact, in 2023, our region had the highest rate of knife crime in the country, worse even than London. I'm talking about the West Midlands county here, rather than the region as a whole. Really terrifying. I think there's been a reduction in police numbers in that period. So since 2010, we have 700 fewer police officers in the West Midlands county. Fewer of those, even more, on neighbourhood policing, so we're seeing less of them out on the street. Our youth services have been cut to the bone. We were hearing at the Dudley Council this year, their new budget is going to abolish all youth services in the borough. And we've come from a point where there used to be hubs all around in Halesowen, in Dudley and Stourbridge, to not having any service at all. And of course, if young people don't have opportunities, if they don't have things to do, the cost of living is increasing. People are feeling excluded. They're going to turn to different groups, and then you see as knife crime increases, young people feel unsafe. And so some people carry knives as a means of protection. And when I speak to some groups that might be involved in that, that's the message they say. Like, well, we don't see police anymore. We don't feel safe. Other people are carrying knives. I've got to carry one to protect myself. It's being shown on social media and in the media as like a macho thing to do. Gives you a bit of respect, gang culture, all this sort of stuff. Some people carry it because of that. And I think they're just so available, aren't they? So knives you can find in any kitchen in the entire country. So it's become, for all of those factors, I think a real problem in our region in particular, but as well as a problem across the country. And I think there's lots of things that we should be doing about that. The first one is to get those youth services back again, most importantly. And you might have heard the Young Futures Hubs is a proposal from the Labour government to set up those services again, targeting people that might be at risk of becoming involved in knife crime, having mental health workers, social workers, teachers, youth workers, all of those services provided in one place to intervene early and provide the support that they might need to get them on a better track of employment or education, not being caught in this horrible circle. And then we're actually reinvesting in our police forces. So we have more neighbourhood police out on the streets. There's 150 more coming for our region. There's a commitment for 13,000 additional police officers across the country, all of them in the neighbourhoods, out on the streets. Every neighbourhood is going to have a named police officer that people can talk to, they can build a relationship with, they can feel comfortable. If they're having any problems, they can call them, to get that kind of neighbourhood policing that we might have seen 30 or 40 years ago back, so people can feel safer again in their communities.
Okay. So a lot of what you're saying is kind of leaning into some of the work that we're doing. So we've got like 9 social media channels just focused on youth. And the thesis is that just like, certain brands will have, a news channel, a movie channel, and then they'll have the sports version. And then there's the sports 1, 2, and 3. We can't expect to just speak to young people as a monolith. So we have, the channels of Sandwell, Dudley, Warsaw, and we'll do things like arts networking. We'll do a content creation day. we'll do, let's show you how to put on your own events. We've now got an idea around media to money. This is all aimed at young people that just aren't engaging elsewhere. With, say, Warsaw, we've got a particular couple of like contracts on dealing with the antisocial behavior, and literally every night we've been listening to some of these young people, but we've also gone all around Coventry, Birmingham, etc. So I'm saying this in the spirit of that reframing, and the conversations that we have, that there's an element of the young people, not even young people, young adults as well, because the other thing I think goes under the radar is the people that I've met, let's just say they were 18 in 2013, now they're like, 30 now, you know what I mean? And I think people don't understand.
I mean, I was 30 in 2013 and now I'm 40.
All right, perfect. So in there, I think if we reframe this as this lifelong journey, we need to also just identify that a lot of these ideas, do they really still stay and track the human well enough? Because this is now kind of where I'm listening and watching everything, and I'm kind of always wondering, okay, well, some of these things were always a good idea, then the money goes away, then they go away, and then we bring them back, etc. But I think the one thing that we've missed is, though, the human has this one machine that tracks them all through their life. It's their brain. And on average, I would argue, whether it's a knife or, as you said, gambling, etc., and a lot of humans are always looking for some form of care, care control. Sometimes it's power, or it's recognition. And what's really interesting is, I would argue that the same behaviors in gambling is seeking that. I'm seeking recognition or power, because I believe that, look at how I made this money, and look how I made it quickly. The story they've told themselves in their head relates to some form of that, but then carrying a knife. Like, I don't feel I'm protected, but if I have that knife, or, I don't know if you don't mind me using the word, they call it, sometimes it's a whop, like a gun or something, right? So if I can show you I got a whop, I'm different to you. I'm going to get recognition, some form of like control, and I'm in control of it because I own it and I have it, right? And then, you look at, say, aspects of domestic abuse and conflict in relationship, people are looking for care, even though it's irrational, and we, there's a whole philosophy on what the brain's doing that's irrational. So sometimes I always kind of gauge to what extent are externalities, and I'm not expecting to have the answer. I'm just almost presenting, and I'm speaking on behalf of other people in this field and the kind of communities. To what extent would externalities manage and influence my internalities if there's no a clear match? I think a youth centre is always a good call, because they're very good for time occupiers. But I don't think we have a strong enough and a long enough conversation about the caliber of the youth worker. Same with psychologists. Our thesis as an organisation is more and more people are going to need personalised mental health services. If you were a twin, I guarantee that both of you, I need to give you different therapists. Even if both of you have gone to Afghanistan, you've seen the same thing, etc., I would probably need to give one person, female, and maybe somebody that's more a certain type of approach, and somebody else maybe like a male. And that's my biggest worry, that when I watch all these people and I see people that are still stuck, like they're 30, they're 40, and and I'm like, oh, this is a brain game. And I do wonder, I wonder when or how the psychological conversation is crafted on a caliber level, rather than, I always say, just because they're social services doesn't mean social services is doing stuff. You and I, because we've never we may never have interacted with social services, we just go, I've referred them, social services have taken over it. When you go and speak to social services, they're like, what you guys think we're doing is not what you think we're doing. Like, it's literally, you know what I mean? So I do wonder, do you come across that tiered conversation yet in Parliament, or is it still very, well, let's just build that provision and at least it's there?
So I mean, we're coming from a really, really low base kit. Okay. So we're approaching a situation where we're going to have no youth services at all.
True. Yeah. It's better than nothing.
And the waiting list for CAMHS, for children's mental health, absolutely enormous. I've spoken to parents in Halesowen whose children have been waiting for 2 years. I think that's a caliber conversation. And I know it's very uncontroversial, but that's a good example of what I mean. Like, you'll hear that
people on waiting list and they're not engaging, it's partly because the people that are now offering these psychological interventions, I'm looking into Sky because I'm recalling all these people telling me they're burnt out themselves. They're uninspiring themselves. I don't think they mean to, but that's now where, let's just say I haven't got any children, but my 14-year-old and your 14-year-old, they've looked at us. We don't have the answer. So whoever comes up next has to be able to do something. And the only people that seem to be making that influence is, TikTokers, YouTubers. They're doing something that makes somebody care. But our professionals are feeling a bit burnt out. So again, I'm just saying that because I do wonder whether some of it is like there's caliber inside all of these sub-niches. But please continue.
No, thanks, Kit. So we're coming from a really low base, from a system that's failing, from a system that's failed young people for a number of years. So the improvements that we're going to make to youth services through the Young Futures Hubs, the massive investment we're making into the NHS, the mental health workers that will be going into every secondary school across the country. This is going to help. But you're completely right, like the level of need is more than what's being provided at the moment. And I think I'll take us back again to the voluntary sector. And I think the different types of support that the voluntary sector can provide, the inspiration, the excitement, the different approaches to mental health support. I mean, we were just talking earlier today to a couple from Halesowen that provide addiction support, and they've not been able to get any funding.
Alternative Plus. So we can connect with them. And again, I think it's useful just the sentence bit. That's the work that we do. Like, even though we're third sector, we deliver, we're very big believers. Who else is out there? How do they work? And we really care about bid development. How do you understand how to stay in the game? And then how do you grow in the game? And how do you get plugged in? So it's good and it's interesting that you're seeing their story. But please continue.
No, thank you, Kit. So there is a perfect example of a couple that have personal trauma themselves. Their son has gone through a horrible addiction journey. They've got the skills, they've got the inspiration, they've got the excitement, they want to help, but they're really struggling to work out where they fit in the NHS system, where they fit in local government, how they can get support. They're not even asking for a lot of money, really. They just want to get involved. And we need to be much better as a country, as a local area, about empowering and connecting people in those sorts of services with the young people that might be struggling, whether it's with addiction, gambling, or being involved in knife crime. And I'm absolutely delighted, Kit, that your organisation is doing something about that to help link people up. And there's organisations like Dudley CVS that are also helping them.
Brilliant. Okay, so I know we've covered a lot there. So a huge thank you for sharing your thoughts and your insights. My biggest takeaway is this reframing. I think that you've really depicted the power of having an age-old conversation and being able to say, yes, we appreciate, in this case, gambling. It brings in revenue, it brings in jobs. Adults should be able to have a flutter and all the usual the tropes. However, we then ask the same question and say, societally, what's now the cost to society? We've looked at the benefit, but let's really analyze that cost. And in that reframing, we're able to say, wait a minute, we can't just have business as usual. We won't ban it, but let's look at these new levers, these new levels. Let's now contain it smarter. I think if we take that into knife crime, that's a potential opportunity. I think so far some people have tried to reframe it as this is a public health issue. I think it's led to a few things, but I also now think it's a mind management conversation. How do we help minds to be able to look at the world and build that future? Like, we do not, how do we give people a big enough why that all they do is build on the why and in a positive why, you know what I mean? Because that's all we really want. You want a better life, I want a better life. But it's interesting where I can find justification in harming another in order to, get what I think I want. So that's really a strong part that I've taken away from this. And I think what you've also highlighted is that backstory is very influential. You're doing some very distinct experiences. And I think anyone who's working in policy decision making shouldn't discount the early years. And the more you can taste, the more you can test, the more you can do, hopefully you can then be of service elsewhere. If people want to follow you and your channel, if there's any constituents that don't know about your Facebook, do you want to do a quick shout out?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kit, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. I think you summarised our conversation very well. I'm on Alex Ballinger MP. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X. Follow me anywhere you like.
Okay, so thank you for joining us for another episode of the Leading Communities podcast. Hopefully you're able to really get some, for me, very valuable insights into the workings behind people that are making some of the decisions for us, but also the challenges that everyone has to navigate. To watch more, to learn more, please follow us on the Leading Communities podcast, and we'll see you soon.